Welcome to our Reaching Minds Thoughts for Your Life Journey podcast. In today's episode, we will be exploring the fascinating, complex, and sometimes bewildering world of artificial intelligence, AI. Now, more and more of us are using AI in our work as well as shaping our lives, from the algorithms that recommends what we should watch next, what we should listen to, and the medical breakthrough that are saving lives, to the self-driving cars that are just around the corner. What is AI really? Is this the stuff of science fiction or a practical tool we use every day? And what does it rapid revolution mean for our future? We're going to be doing a deep dive into these questions with one of the leading minds in the field of AI, Raphael Joseph, who is the co-founder of We Are Agentic, a digital and transformational platform of training AI. Raphael will help us cut through the hype, get to the heart of what's real, what's possible, and what we need to be thinking about right now, and getting a perspective on the technology that is defining our age. I know that I can certainly benefit from knowing more about AI. Welcome, Raf. Tell me a little bit about what do we need to fully grasp around AI, and how would you define AI?
AI fundamentally is software, but the difference between, let's say, AI and the software that we have always known up until this point, and when I say software, I'm talking about the software that runs on your telephone, Microsoft Windows, Office, and all the different apps that you use on your phone. Those are all software, but those apps have always followed hard-coded rules. So there's actually been a software developer that has predicted to some degree what it is that you're going to do. So if you click here, then show this, or if you do this, then do this, or do this a number of times. And software up until this point followed rules. And sometimes you would have noticed that software doesn't always work in the way that you want it to work. And that's just because the developer has maybe not thought that's something that you would want to do. So it was never written into the rules of the software, and therefore it just doesn't do that thing that you wanted to do. And so that's what software has done up until this point. The difference with AI is that it is software that learns from data instead of following rules that have been written by a software developer. And that is the fundamental difference between it, that it learns from patterns of data and it makes predictions based on probability. It doesn't output things based on a hard-coded rule that a software developer has written. And so an example of this is that you could maybe see AI as quite an advanced autocomplete, but for languages and images and decisions and lots of different things. When you use autocomplete, that's really what AI to some degree is doing in the background. It's built on these statistical models that will just estimate the most likely response, either the next word in a chain or the next pixel in a picture or video. And so it's probably the best way of describing it is if I turn around and said to you, the cat sat on the, what would your answer be?
Matt.
Matt. Okay. Now, AI would also likely predict the same word, Matt. So if you wrote into the AI, tell me how to end this sentence, the cat sat on the. It's not that there's been a software developer that has explicitly put into the code, if somebody writes into the chat window, the cat sat on, the next word that you should output to the user is Matt, right? That's traditional software. But AI has not had that explicitly coded into it. The AI will predict the word Matt, not because it understands cats or it understands Matts, but because that's what normally will come next in the data that it was trained on, but statistically, probabilistically. And that is what AI is. It is basically a statistical probability engine.
And you were here also, just building on things. I want to try and understand the different types of AI. And maybe you can, we hear things like narrow AI, general AI, super
Yeah.
intelligence. Can you explain the differences without being too technical? Because not all my listeners are technical. And tell us where they are on that spectrum.
And narrow AI is exactly what you would think of it. If you go back to what I was saying before, if you wanted to create an artificial intelligence engine and you trained it on all of the data that existed in the world, there are probably lots of instances of where that data would conflict with. For the same situation, you would have conflicting data or different results or different outcomes or whatever it is. And as we are as humans, we have those situations in life. But if you want your AI to do a very specific task, very specific, whatever that task may be, then you can just train that AI on the specific data. Probably law is a very good example, or contract law, or things like that you don't want to train it on a whole world of information. And that is where you get more narrow AI, where, as we were going back to what I was saying before, the probability of your results being accurate is going to be higher because the data that it was trained on is a subset of all the data in the world, and therefore the chances of it coming out with a result are going to be better.
Yeah. So there's a word that's been floating around, which is hallucination. So what does that mean? So I'm really interested in that.
As saying before, that AI doesn't actually it doesn't actually understand things, even though it seems to be the case that when you go into ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or Claude or whatever, and you write something in there, it seems to be a human that is responding to you. In that respect, it passes the Turing test, that you can't tell the difference between a human and an AI. It seems to be the case that you are actually speaking to something, some intelligence there in the background that is understanding and knows and has a sense of what's going on. But actually, it doesn't. It is just, as I said, it is a sort of a probability engine, a statistical model. That's every word that comes one after the other is just because that's the most likely word that should come after the other. And so AI doesn't know what is right and it doesn't know what is true and what is false. It's programmed to have these sort of guardrails, and the data that it's trained on and then retrained on and corrected and tweaked in the background. And their training data they see is that, oh, that was right, that was correct, that result. So let's go back and tweak one of those parameters so that the next time that happens, that will be like it. So that's the training of the AI. But it doesn't always get it right. You're looking at trillions and trillions of potential outcomes. And so sometimes it just sees data and comes up with a pattern that it thinks is right. There are good examples of where this happened, where I think in the States, I can't remember the exact name of it, but there was an example of where a lawyer had gone and basically referenced cases that didn't even exist. AI had made them up because based on the data,
I did hear that.
Based on the data it had been given, it seemed like the most likely outcome, and whatever the prompt was that the lawyer had put in. And so that's a hallucination. It's where it presents information as fact that is actually just a pattern that the AI has seen as being the most probable outcome, even though it didn't actually happen.
Actually, that also leads me on to two questions that I want to ask, which is ethics and biases and obviously governance. AI, as you're saying, it's about patterns, it's about data, which contain human biases. How do we ensure that AI systems are built to be fair and equitable and don't amplify the societal prejudices?
A lot of it's going to be down to the data that it's trained on. Okay, think going back to that example that we were talking about before, narrow AI. Imagine that you only ever trained an AI on data that was from a particular culture or a particular nation or even a particular language, for example.
So AI is prolific everywhere. You turn around and it's in your face, you're reading it, you're watching it. What do you think are the biggest impact on our daily lives around AI that we ought to be aware of? And thinking beyond, I guess, the obvious of Siri and Alexa.
AI as a discipline it's huge, actually. AI
is almost like saying biology or physics or chemistry. Like it encompasses a huge amount of information in different areas and different disciplines or sub-disciplines inside of it. And so AI has been around in our lives for many years and has been having an effect on our lives for many years as well. And so it's not like this is AI has just in effect come out and we're using it almost for the first time. We've been using AI for recommendations inside of our searches in video and Netflix and all of those sorts of things for a number of years. And natural language processing, NLP, has been around. I remember when I was at university and there was a platform that came out called Ask Jeeves.
Oh, yes, I remember
But
that.
that was 25 years ago.
Yes.
So artificial intelligence as an area, as a discipline, has been around for decades. I think that the difference now, there's a few reasons why it's come out now. We can get onto that if you like, as to why now, in effect, although even though it's been around for decades. But it's the effects that we're seeing now are because it's so prolific publicly. There are a few reasons, maybe we'll touch on them very high level as to why it is now, but
Yes.
really the big change to some degree you could say happened in around I think it was 2017. Google basically invented a new way for AI to understand language, and it's something called a transformer, which just essentially made it easier for AI to make sense of full sentences and context and meaning behind things in a much more human way. And it was these transformers that really changed things. But there'd been other changes that have been going on inside of technology that were paving the way towards today as well. One of them was the amount of data that was out there, because AI, as I said before, is software that basically is as good as the data that is fed into it for training. And so once you have all of this data available to you, you can imagine if you had all the books in the world available to you, but unless they are in a format, in a digital format, that you can feed them into a software application, they are useless in many ways. You're not going to have somebody sitting there reading a million books to a software application. So it was having all of this data of books and websites and conversations and all of that available as training data for the AI. And that also coincided with cloud technology, where companies and all of us were not just keeping all of our information on our personal laptops on the hard drives, but we were uploading it all into the cloud. We were using cloud applications. And so all of this data suddenly was available on the internet and out there and available for these AI companies to train their models on them. And so all of these things, the transformer, data, cloud architecture, and the advances in the chips as well, the sort of cloud computing and the chips that were made, making the ability to train AI models much faster and at scale and for much less money. So all of these things came together within the last 10 years, really. And then the big thing was the public launch of ChatGPT, which was launched to the public, which made AI feel real, I would say, for people for the first time, even though we'd all been using subsets of AI for decades in our lives, or maybe without knowing it. Suddenly it was very smart, useful, free, and crucially, it was accessible. All you need to do is just go into this application, type in a few words or questions, and you get all this information fed back to you. And this sort of technology was really only used within industry or within companies that had a lot of money, banks or things, and so on. And that's really why this has all come into our lives at the moment.
I did a little bit of reading around AI. There was something on LinkedIn this morning. Somebody was saying you need to be cautious around AI. And then there was another thing around parents who are suing an AI of a company because their child, 16-year-old son, committed suicide because of interacting with an AI whose data. One of my questions is that there is the kind of cautious element or the underbelly around AI, or am I phrasing that as a wrong question? I don't know.
No, you are. There's different ways of putting it. I would say that all introductions of new technology into society bring with it risk and potential harm. And there are countless examples of that from the introduction of the car. If you think about how many people have been killed by cars, aeroplanes, and whatever it may be, right?
Yes.
And you can even take it to even the less sort of tangible types of technology, maybe like social media, in terms of the damage potentially that has had on society, ranging from mental health challenges with teenagers through
social media, the bullying and all of that.
And all of that. So I don't think that the question of the introduction of a new technology and the balance of harms that are around that is new with AI. I think the difference with the concern around AI, as opposed to all other forms of technology that have ever been introduced into society, is that we always felt that no matter what those other technologies could do in terms of the harm, that we always had the ability to control them. We always had the ability, if we wanted to, not that we would have done, to say we are banning cars, or we are banning the production of cars, or you can only drive your car at 70 miles an hour on the motorway. So we always felt like we had a set of rules that we as human beings could control. And that is the same with everything. Even with social media, it's not that we do a very good job of it, but we could. If the government wanted to, like they have in Australia, they could turn around and say no under 16s are allowed to use social media or things like that. The thing with AI is that there is a very real and reasonable concern that AI could become so advanced that
that's one of my questions.
That it becomes more advanced than us. And we, therefore, it is the same principle as a child thinking that they are clever enough to be able to get one over on their parents, or that they are clever enough. A child doesn't know what they don't know. So they think that they might be doing something that is clever. But what they don't realize is that their parents are completely and utterly aware of every single thing that they are doing. But the child still thinks that they are able to lie to their parents or get away with things. And I think that the same principle is with humans, is that once AI gets to the point that it is cleverer than us, and we are no longer able to test it, or we are no longer able to create tests that we are able to know if it's lying or not, that if that were to get to a point that we lose control of that technology, and that is then potentially an existential problem for humanity. Now, it's quite a philosophical problem, because there are lots of other harms which are outside of that existential question, like how many jobs are we going to lose as a result of...
That was one of my other questions,
But I would say that they are different categories of harms. Those are harms within our control. It's just that we can decide whether or not we want to do it, versus harms that are potentially outside of our control and we don't know where that those would go. And those are more existential harms. And I would separate those two types of harms with AI.
It's interesting because one of the things I was reading on LinkedIn this morning was somebody posted saying, using AI makes you think less. You somehow become, you don't think, you're not so creative in that way. It was somebody who's a leadership coach. And I'm going, does it make me think less? It certainly is a tool I use that I can refine it and it gives me ideas. I don't know whether I think less of it. I don't have to work so hard at conceptualizing, because if I ask the right question, it gives me something. I still have to work with phrasing it or making it my own, really. So what do you think about that? That AI makes you think less?
I actually don't agree with that, but I understand why people think that it does that. I think it depends on how you use it and what you use it for. I'll give you an example. Let's take a university student writing an essay. So I'll give you an example of myself, right? So I studied philosophy and computer science at university in 1998, right? And my dissertation, coincidentally, was on the problems of consciousness and what consciousness is and whether or not you could even have a conscious machine. And so now, I wrote that essay, that dissertation, I can't remember, 10,000 words or something, from reading books, from lecture notes that I had got, and synthesizing all of this information and so on and so forth. Now, let's just say that I was writing that essay today. Now, I could, if I wanted to, go into AI, give it the brief that I had literally been given from my university lecturer. So let's say I'd been given a brief of a paragraph or whatever, put into AI and say, write me an essay. Of 10,000 words on this subject. Now, it would write that essay. It would not sound like me. It would clearly have been written by AI. It would potentially have many mistakes in there, or what they call hallucinations, where AI had seen patterns in the data and decided that this was a sort of a pattern that was worth putting forward as a fact, because AI itself doesn't know what is right and what isn't right. It's just a pattern matching statistical model in many ways. And now that's at one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme, and this is the part that I'm arguing for, is that I would work with AI almost like a personal tutor, where I would use it to throw ideas around, where I would use it to help me put a structure together for my essay, where I would still have to check all the sources that I get the information from. I would be the creative input in many ways. It would be almost like an augmented version of myself, like an AI augmented version of myself. By the way, not that dissimilar in many ways to using Google. Google in many ways is an internet augmented version of myself, because I don't have access to all of the world's information unless I go into Google. And so it is not that dissimilar to that, but the outcome would still be an essay that I had to take a tremendous amount of time on, that would still be my ideas, my flow, all of that. The difference is that this essay would be incredible. And so I think that what has to change is that we have to have a much higher expectation of the deliverables, because now that you are, how can I put this? It's before word processors came out.
Yes.
There was
I remember the typewriters.
So there was an acceptance that the words on the page might not be fully straight, or there was an acceptance that you might make a spelling mistake and then you had to Tipp-Ex over it. But then word processors came out, and the expectation level was raised. You no longer could hand in an essay that had spelling mistakes in it. You no longer could hand in an essay that had Tipp-Ex marks on it. You were expected to basically print the sheet out again after having gone in. And so then that level, then the internet came out, and it was no longer a case of, oh, I didn't have enough money, so I could only buy these 2 books. And so these are the only 2 books that I could reference for my essay. It was like, no, the expectation was that you had access to a world of information, including Wikipedia. So all that's happened along this journey is that the expectation, and therefore the sort of relative mark that you get, has just been increased because you've had more ability and information. And so it is true now of AI.
Question that raises for me is, how will this AI going to be shaping us for the next 5 to 10 years? What does it hold for us, both in terms of expected and the unexpected?
It's a very difficult question because things are moving so quickly, number one. Nobody knows everything about it, certainly not myself. I'm involved in this space, but I'm by no means a world-renowned expert on this. And secondly, there's a lot of things that we don't know. Like we just don't know what we don't know. There are things that are happening that we don't know why they happen. Hallucinations, for example, when they first started, actually nobody knew why they happened. It's just the way that AI systems are created. It's not like lines of code where if something breaks, you can go in and say, oh, that line of code there broke because I didn't put a full stop there, or I didn't do that, I'll fix it. And then we don't actually, debugging problems in AI is very difficult. Same way as, I don't know, with somebody's brain. You can't just go in and switch a neuron on or off and suddenly they change as a person. Like it's very complicated. So we don't know what's going to happen. There are good scenarios, there are bad scenarios, there's a mixture of those. On a very practical level, as an everyday level, it's hugely beneficial to people. People use AI in a way that is hugely beneficial to them for so many things in their work, in their life. People doing holiday research on it or medical research on it, obviously, if you do it in a safe way. But so for many of us, the experience of AI has been a very positive one in the short term. In the medium to long term, we don't know. For example, what if it starts leading to a lot of job losses? I think there is a very good case to be made at the moment that the one of the reasons for the sort of stagnation inside of the employment in the jobs market, particularly in tech, particularly at the lower end or the more junior end, is because of AI. Because companies are now starting to ask the question, do I need to hire somebody or can AI do this for me? Or should I spend all that time training somebody up with all the difficulties that come around hiring new people and integrating them into the business and training them and all the things that come with people? Do I want to do that, or do I want to maybe spend money on building an agent? And if that becomes more prolific, which it probably will, and that starts leading to job losses that are at a greater rate than the job creations that will also inevitably come via AI, then that can have a hugely detrimental effect on society and something that governments, I'm sure, are thinking about. By their nature, governments typically tend to be slow to handle
I
these.
agree with you. And that sort of brings me on a little bit around governance and regulations. And I know that governments are, there's a whole area we know around porn and so forth, but governance needs to be stronger and more tighter. I guess I don't know how you get there, because if you're saying we don't know what we don't know, how do we regulate it then?
I genuinely don't know the answer to this. I can say that look at how governments have managed to regulate social media or other forms of technology. Typically, the companies are much smarter, brighter, and better funded than governments are, and are always, it seems to be, one step ahead of them when it comes to this. And I've listened to a number of talks from experts in this field, and there does not seem to be any consensus over how to achieve this and what to do about it. In fact, there's actually quite a lot of conflicting opinions around this area. AI could be used for incredible good. It could be used for incredible harm as well, like many very powerful technologies. And so I think it should be viewed in that way, though, as an incredibly powerful technology that has the propensity for incredible good and incredible harm, on a par, if not far greater than nuclear technology, for example.
Actually, it's so interesting. It makes me think about the Terminator 3, where the Terminator 1 with by 3, you got the sort of advanced technology. I'm sure, I hope it doesn't get to that. Maybe it won't get to that in my lifetime. However, more on the ground, I've heard people who have been in the artistic world talk about how AI is impacting their design work, their sort of creative work, and leading to job insecurity, as that you have highlighted. So can AI replace the artist, the Van Goghs or your Joe Average?
I don't know if the answer to that is always going to be subjective. I certainly think that there is going to be a place for AI inside of art, and that it will be incorporated into art. And I think that we should often stop thinking about AI or in such binary terms as like it's either going to be humans or it's going to be AI. I think that there's going to be a lot of human AI collaboration in all forms of life and the workforce as well. And think of AI as something that augments, not necessarily replaces. So I definitely think that is going to happen. But I don't know. I think it's a very human question. Here's probably a good example. Let's say we managed to create robots that could run or do the 100 meters faster than a human. Does that mean that we are all necessarily then going to stop watching the athletics and Olympics and just watch races between robots just because they can run the 100 meters faster? I think the answer is no. Or
No.
would people want to go to Wimbledon to watch two robots playing tennis against each other just because they are better? And I think the answer to that is no.
No.
There is something that we enjoy about humans actually doing things because we relate so much to it. And so we want to see humans playing tennis. I certainly wouldn't want to go to Wimbledon to watch two robots play against each other. I wouldn't want, and I think that the same might well be true of art. That yes, you could probably get AI to create art that is as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than many of the paintings that we know of. But the thing is just going to be that we know it's been created by a machine, and what we are interested in is the sort of the human art, the fallibility of humans and how that's expressed in art and so on. That is a personal opinion, but I can't see any world in which we decide that just because AI can draw a picture better than a human, that we are no longer going to want to see art done by humans.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Interesting enough, my Reaching Minds logo is an AI production, by the way. So
Right.
that was done by Sumit Rai.
Yeah. Well, either way, there's a good example of where AI art is useful because nobody is coming to your logo to put it on their wall and marvel at it every day. So it's like you need a logo for your business and you needed to do it quickly. And so there's a good example of where it does work.
Yeah. So just in terms of the last couple of questions, the young people today, if they're interested in career in AI, what do they need to understand about the technology?
There's a lot of careers in AI. You could go on the technology side, into the sort of the data science side of things and become a software developer, a data scientist. You could go towards the other side of things and move more towards ethics, and AI ethics officers are definitely going to become roles that are going to become commonplace, and bias with AI and so on. There are going to be lots of roles that we do not even know about at the moment that are going to come up. But putting aside, let's say, new roles that don't exist at the moment that will exist in the future, one thing I would say to young people is that understanding how to use AI, and by that I mean understanding how to write structured prompts that get you very high quality, accurate responses from AI, understanding how to iterate those prompts and how to optimize your prompts and work with AI. And they are not going to be skills that are optional anymore. For me, those are absolute must-have skills now for people going into the workplace. It's critical. In fact, I would say if there is, because of the because of this sort of how prolific AI is now within the workplace, that one of the things that is problematic, as I said before, is that many new people into the workforce are finding it hard to get jobs because AI actually can do a lot of the things that they would have been brought in to do early on in their careers. The sort of the grunt work, the data input type of things that we all did when we first started our jobs. We did the jobs that were just given to us. And if those things can now be automated, that's a problem for people coming into the workforce. But I think where they can add the most value is that they are far more tech savvy than many of the more experienced people in the workforce. So we train.
I was going to ask you that actually about your work.
Yeah, we train. A lot of our clients are in the regulated industries, and law is an example of one of them. And so you have senior lawyers, partners inside of law firms. Many of them are not very tech savvy, and you could argue that the best combination of young, new lawyers coming into those firms who are very tech savvy, very AI savvy, even very social media savvy, the whole new world of technology. And they bring that skill set and combine that with the experience of lawyers who've been in the game for decades. And the combination of those two actually is very powerful. And so I think that's where, if I was going into the workforce now, I would make sure that I am an expert in AI. I would be inhaling all of the free online courses that are offered by all the big players, Microsoft, Google, OpenAI. They all have these online courses, and that is exactly what I would be doing. And I would be making sure that I building brand for myself and on LinkedIn and social media and making sure everybody understands that I'm an AI expert. And I think this is definitely the way that I would be going.
Moving towards. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is that way. And you may not know this, but a friend of mine was telling me that she takes the picture of her fridge, loads it on ChatGPT, and say, what can I make? What recipes can I make from these food in the fridge?
Yeah. Yeah. There are
It's amazing, isn't it?
so many examples of these niche use cases almost of how people will use ChatGPT in their daily lives. And I love hearing stories. That one I have heard before. I have known people that have said that before. I hear all the time these new quirky uses for ChatGPT.
Actually, I did it myself. I added some ingredients and it came up with a recipe for me. So
Yeah.
I thought, oh, it's interesting. So
Yeah.
if there's a single message you want the listeners to walk away with today about AI, what would that be?
I'd say it depends on who the listener is that is being directed towards. So if it was towards an individual, so let's say I've already answered that question for young people going into the workforce. If I was answering that question to companies, I would say that they need to start thinking about what a future looks like for their business, where their business is what I would term as being an AI first company, in that if they were to start their business again today with the knowledge that they have about AI, how would they build that business and how can they, to some degree, reverse engineer their current business to be like that? And that transformation, and it'll take years for many companies to get there. In fact, probably for all companies to get there.
You think so?
Oh, yes. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. We are in for a decade, if not longer, transformation of businesses into this world. And for me, a lot of that starts with the training of your workforce. It's why ours is not just, we don't just call ourselves an AI transformation agency. We are an AI training and transformation agency because although training is a subset of that transformation, it is such an important subset that we've elevated it to be part of the title of what we do. Training is absolutely key to this. And structured training for your workforce. I'm not talking about letting everybody just get their own personal versions of ChatGPT or Gemini and start experimenting with it, although that is good. Proper structured training for all of your team. That is definitely the place to start, because at some point into the future, you're going to be answering the question for yourselves as a business owner. If I had no limits to the number of employees I could have, how would I change my business? What would be my new strategy towards my company? And while that thought might be a little bit into the future, it is one that is coming. And so that's the advice I would give to businesses. To normal individuals, if you're an individual who has not already started experimenting at the very least with AI, you should do that immediately. It is so simple. You just go on, open up an account for yourself in OpenAI or Gemini or Copilot or whatever it is. It's free. And just start playing with it. You can't break anything. Just start experimenting and using it. And if you have been using it for quite a while already, but you are still at the point that you are just on the single line prompts or 1 or 2 line prompts, you want to now start taking yourself to the next level and start really understanding how to build structured prompts. And those
Give us an
prompts,
example of that. What would that be? Structured prompt.
so prompting, when you go into AI and you write a
Yeah.
prompt,
Yes.
as I said in the beginning, it feels like you're just talking to a person, but in actual fact, you're not. You're
No.
essentially programming software. You are coding. It's just that it's become so accessible. It's become so abstracted from the machine level language, that now we're using natural language to basically program computers. The problem with that is that natural language, on the one hand, very easy. That's why it's so accessible to all of us. But on the other hand, it is incredibly ambiguous. And so when you're writing your prompts, you want to try to remove that ambiguity to some degree, but you also need to offer the AI huge amounts of information for it to be able to give you the right responses. You need to give it an incredible amount of context as to what you're doing. You want to really stop the AI from inferring. That's what you want to stop.
Oh, right.
So you want to give it a context. What's going on? What's the reason behind all of this? Why am I even asking you to do this for me? And then you want to tell it what the goal is. Be very specific. What am I actually asking you to do? And then you want to give it a tone that you want to, maybe you want to tell it to answer in the tone of an individual or of a particular profession, or you give it examples of the tone and the formats that you want and the constraints that you want and the examples of the outputs. And once you've got all of that structured prompt in there, you can be easily at around about a side of A4 for your prompt. And the difference between somebody who might have been using AI for a while and has been writing 1 or 2 line prompts compared to somebody that then learns how to build structured prompts and starts writing half a side, 1 side, 2 side, 3 sides of A4 prompts. And the difference in the level of the responses that they get from AI are shocking to people.
Really? Wow, I've tried that.
Just shocking, really. It's one of the first training classes that we do is structured prompt engineering. It's called prompt engineering for a reason, because it is an engineering discipline. You are learning how to prompt and you are iterating and you are trying something, seeing what the result is. That's not the right result. Let's go and tweak it and get better. And these are all techniques that you use to get the best responses that you need.
It's interesting because I asked for something. I gave a couple of sentences and I said, oh, and it came back. And I said, can you make it a bit more human for me?
Yeah.
And it did. And I said, could you refine it for me even more? But I didn't appreciate that you can write prompts which are almost A4 size, because usually mine are about half a paragraph and that's it.
Exactly. And once you get good at this and you look back at the prompts that you were doing before you had learnt this new skill, and you look back, you think, goodness me, like I am not surprised I used to find AI so frustrating with the answers that it used to give me. And so, yes, it's so easy to learn, it's so accessible, and the gains that you get as a result are so big, it's a no-brainer for me. I would not hire anybody these days into a company that had not had that would not see themselves as being a relatively decent prompt engineer. And if they didn't know that, I think that their company is doing them a disservice. And by the way, the company is doing themselves a disservice by not training their staff to be able to do this.
So it's worthwhile going on a AI training course. This is what you're saying.
Yes, it is. It is a no-brainer. It is it's probably the only training in the world that pays for itself multiple times over within the first week of doing it. When we do our training courses, we take it a step further. We don't just teach people how to prompt. We then teach them how to, in the first training workshop anyway, build their own personal assistants that they can reuse again and again to do certain tasks. And the people in our class, we then sit down and say, okay, so the agent that you've built, the personal assistant that you've built for yourself, like how long was that taking you to do on a weekly basis? And we get a minimum of an hour a week per person. That is in a minute. Sometimes you get 10 hours a week per person from one class, but a minimum of 1 hour a week. We do our classes when we do our in-person classes, not our online ones, but our in-person classes are up to 15 people. It's like in a single day's workshop, you will be getting a minimum of 15 hours worth of return on that investment on a weekly basis from 1 day workshop. You know, and that's the minimum that you'll get. I don't know any other training that has ever offered that level of return on your investment and such an immediate return. And I think that for me is why it's just a no-brainer.
Thank you very much. It encourages me to go on that training course that I put aside, saying maybe I don't need to go on that. So it sounds that it would be very educational and accessible to me to do that. So I really appreciate your
I
input.
would be very happy to offer you a place on one of our cohorts.
Oh, well, I'd love to come.
So there you go.
There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you. If you're interested in working with me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or www.nitasharma.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, why not consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you have access to your podcast, and leave a review.